that word remains dangerous and powerful and painful. And it remains the worst thing just about that a white person can say to a black person. I'm really glad that you asked about this, because this is about white supremacy and white supremacy culture, which is very much rampant in the UK. Just had a politician, I believe, say that immigrants were colonizing the United Kingdom. Never mind the fact that the UK colonized the world and messed up thousands of civilizations that are now needing places to go because of displacement due to the disruption of their political and social systems. Remember also that the UK profited from slavery. As late as 2015, the government was still repaying reparations to 46,000 families who were slave-owning families. That is like someone being a human trafficker of the worst possible varieties. They traffic children for immoral purposes, and women and men, and work people to unalivement and unalive them in horrific ways. The passage is completely inhumane, and there are people unalive on the way. The very worst of human traffickers. That was the slave trade. Now imagine one of these guys, he stops doing his business, and the British government says, we're going to pay you and your grandchildren, we're going to pay you back for all of the money that you lost from giving up human trafficking. That's an immoral debt. It's indefensible. But it's it's a math that made perfect sense to the UK. Why? Anti-Black racism. The Windrush generation were groups of Black people and Indian people, but mainly Black people from the Caribbean and Africa, who came after WW2 to rebuild, completely rebuild much of what you see in the UK built by Black hands. And they were promised citizenship in exchange. In 2018, 2019, they started deporting their descendants back to countries they had never lived in, back to their great-grandparents' countries of origin, because they didn't keep good paperwork, etc., etc. Was there a huge, enormous outcry from white people? Not really. Not really. It wasn't until it became a big international story that many people in the UK got interested. So again, now we have the Windrush generation screwed over, and we have the UK government paying back 46,000 families who lost out when they freed the enslaved people they were trafficking and working to unalivement. This is the kind of place this is the culture. So that word still holds enormous power. That's not even going into the collapse of Highland Towers, which affected people of color to a much more extreme degree. John lives in a racist nation. He lives in a nation that devalues Black people. He lives in a nation that devalued Black people so much that the British Broadcasting Company was determined to put out over their airways a word that belongs mid-20th century to Jim Crow, directed at guests to their country and on their stage. They worked overtime to do that because they were told by, I think it was Warner Brothers, told them to make sure they took that out, but they didn't. They had time to take it out, but they didn't. They don't want to talk about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the fact that he's been arrested for misconduct in public office, crime which carries a potential life sentence as a result of his connection to people in certain files. They don't want to talk about that. This is a really good way to change the subject, which is, again, incredibly racist. So the UK is a racist place, which means that when it comes to the N-word, it has never been divested of its power. As long as anti-Blackness exists, that word remains dangerous and powerful and painful. And it remains the worst thing just about that a white person can say to a black person. John Davidson himself does not have to be racist in order for that word to enter into his mind as a tick and be expressed. Because the tick itself is about saying the worst possible thing in a particular situation. And the worst possible thing he could have said in that moment was the N-word. And it came out. It's an indictment of his country more than it's an indictment of him. And even really more than it's an indictment of the particular institutions that did it. His country profited from the slave trade. His country has continued to extract labor from black people while reneging on the promises made to them. His country has skinheads and white nationalist political parties. That's his country. Why wouldn't he say the N-word if one of the things that he ticks are slurs? It's in the air that he breathes. And as he said himself, he tends to stay in a fairly white area. He was worried, when he came to an interview in London, that he would see a black person and yell the N-word at them because there aren't so many black people where he comes from. Now, he could benefit from deconstruction. He could benefit from learning how to express empathy for people who do not have Tourette's but are also marginalized. He could benefit from those things. But as far as why he said it and why the word would be anywhere near his mouth or his vocabulary, it's because it's in the very air that his country emits.